When I first joined Ishida Corporation, I thought I'd finally made it. A stable job, a clean office, a polite staff, everything I needed to start over. I told myself that if I worked hard and stayed quiet, everything would be fine. But I didn't realize then that surviving here meant surviving him, Kaito Ishida, my boss. He wasn't just the youngest executive in the company, he was its legend. People spoke his name in whispers, like a warning. His cold gaze could silence a room. His voice could slice through excuses like a blade. He was tall, poised, and perfectly dressed, an image of control. Yet, every time his dark eyes swept across the office, it felt like standing under a storm cloud that might break at any second. And I, timid, clumsy Ryu, was his new assistant. The first few weeks were a blur of late nights and anxious mornings. I memorized files, typed until my fingers went numb, and double-checked every report I touched. But no matter how much effort I put in, I always felt like I was one mistake away from being crushed under Kaito's icy stare. That day began like any other. Too bright, too quiet, too full of nerves. Kaito had an important presentation with the board. My job was simple: manage the slides and hand in the data when he asked. Simple, until my trembling hands betrayed me. When he said, "Next slide," I pressed the slides and hand him the data when he asked. Simple, until my trembling hands betrayed me. When he said, "Next slide," I pressed the wrong key. The screen went black for a second, just a second, but it was enough. The room froze. The board members glanced around, confused, and Kaito turned toward me, his expression unreadable. The silence was worse than yelling. Then his voice, low and sharp, cut through the air. "Ryu." "Yes, sir." My voice cracked. His eyes were like glass, cold, reflecting everything but revealing nothing. "Fix it." I fumbled with the laptop, my pulse racing so fast I could barely breathe. The projector blinked back to life, but the damage was done. A few executives whispered, one of them smirked. Kaito's jaw tightened. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The tension in his body spoke louder than words. And then, in front of everyone, he said it. "Obey me," he growled, his voice dropping into something darker, something that sent a chill down my spine, or face harsher consequences. The words echoed in my head. The room went still. Every gaze turned toward me. Pity, curiosity, judgment. I couldn't look at anyone. My throat burned, but no sound came out. "Understood," he said. I nodded quickly. "Why, yes, Mr. Ishida." He turned away as if nothing had happened. The meeting went on, but I barely heard a word. My ears rang, my chest ached. When it ended, I gathered the papers with shaking hands, avoiding everyone's eyes. No one spoke to me for the rest of the day. By the time the office emptied out that evening, I sat at my desk staring at the clock, too afraid to move. I wanted to go home, but my name appeared on my phone screen. From "Mr. Ishida, come my office." My heart sank. I walked down the silent hallway. The air felt heavier near his office, the lights dimmer. His door stood half open, the faint sound of typing coming from inside. I knocked softly. "Enter." His voice was calm again, but it carried that same weight, authority that dared me to disobey. Kaito sat behind his sleek black desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. Even in that relaxed state, he looked like power incarnate. His desk lamp cast sharp shadows across his face, making him look both exhausted and dangerous. "Sit," he said without looking up. I sat. My palms were sweaty. I hid them under the table. He finally looked at me, his eyes unreadable. "Do you know why you're here?" "Because I messed up the presentation," I whispered. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You didn't just mess up, Ryu. You made me look weak. And I don't like being made to look weak." The words cut deep. I stared at the floor, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." He studied me for a long moment, then stood. His footsteps were quiet, deliberate, as he walked around the desk and stopped beside me. "Do you know why I didn't fire you today?" I looked confused. "No, sir, because you're not useless," he said. "Simply you're careless, but you pay attention to details when it matters. I see it in your reports." I blinked, not sure if that was a compliment or a trap. "Do you think you can prove me right?" he asked. I'll try." He frowned slightly, tilting his head. "Not try, redo." The firmness in his tone made me straighten instinctively. There was something in his eyes, an intensity that wasn't just anger. It was like he wanted me to challenge him, to meet him halfway. But my voice barely worked. "Yes, sir," I managed. "Good." He turned away, but his hand hesitated for a second as he picked up his coffee mug. It trembled slightly, just barely, but enough for me to notice. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You're dismissed." I stood, bowing quickly, then stepped out before I could embarrass myself further. My heart was still hammering. I'd expected fury, maybe humiliation, but not this strange test. He'd pushed me to the edge, but hadn't crossed it. As I walked back to my desk to pack my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. Beneath that perfect composure, something was breaking. That night, I stayed late, too afraid to face the crowded subway and the questions in my head. The office was dark and silent except for the distant hum of air conditioning. I walked past Kaido's office on my way out and froze. The door was slightly open again. Inside, Kaido sat alone, his head in his hands. His shoulders rose and fell with uneven breaths. I heard a low, guttural sound, half growl, half sigh. "Why can't I just?" He stopped, fist clenching. "No, control yourself." My chest tightened. The tone of his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was pained. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. For a moment, the man I'd feared all day didn't look like a monster at all. He looked human. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, muttering, "You can't lose control." "Not again." Then, softer, a whisper I almost missed, "You scared him. You always scare them." I stepped back quietly, guilt flooding through me. I didn't want him to know I'd overheard. Whatever this was, it wasn't for anyone else to see. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, my heart felt heavy. I'd seen two sides of Kaido Ishida in one day. The ruthless boss who humiliated me, and the broken man who sat alone in the dark, fighting something invisible. For the first time since joining the company, I realized something I couldn't explain. I wasn't just afraid of him anymore. I was curious, and that, somehow, scared me even more. Days passed after that humiliating meeting, yet the echo of Kaido Ishida's voice never left me. Even when he wasn't around, it was like his presence lingered in the air, sharp, heavy, and suffocating. I told myself to keep my distance, to work, not feel, to stay invisible. But how do you ignore someone who commands every breath of the office just by existing? Every morning, the sound of his shoes striking the marble floor signaled his arrival. Everyone straightened up immediately, pretending not to notice while secretly watching. His suits were always immaculate, his gaze cutting. He'd greet no one, just stride his office, close the door, and turn the air around him to ice. And then there was me, his unlucky assistant, trapped in that cold orbit. At first, I thought the humiliation from that day would make him despise me completely. But something strange happened instead. He didn't fire me. In fact, he started involving me in more tasks, projects I wasn't even qualified for. I should have been relieved, but every moment around him felt like walking on thin glass. "Ryu, the report. Now, Ryu, correct the data. You missed a decimal. Ryu, look at me when I'm talking." He scolded me almost daily. Yet, I began to notice something subtle under the harshness, tiny glimpses of restraint. When another executive tried to blame me for a scheduling mistake, Kaido's voice cut in before I could speak. That error was on my desk before it reached him. Kaido said sharply, "If anyone's at fault, it's me." The room fell silent. No one dared to argue. After the meeting, I lingered by his office, unsure whether to thank him or hide. He didn't look up from his papers when he said quietly, "Don't mistake protection for forgiveness. Do better next time." Still, my chest ached in a strange, confused way. He wasn't just my boss anymore. He'd become a puzzle I couldn't solve. Every cruel word came with an act of silent defense. Every glare carried a shadow of exhaustion. One night, I stayed late to finish a marketing proposal. The rest of the team had gone home hours ago. The city lights glowed outside the tall glass windows, painting silver streaks across the polished floor. The silence was peaceful until a faint sound broke it, a low, muffled groan from Kaido's office. I froze. Was he still here? It was almost midnight. I hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe concern, pushed me forward. The light in his office was dim, only his desk lamp glowing faintly. Kaido was slumped forward, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His right hand pressed against his side, where his white shirt was stained with a faint spot of red. I gasped softly, "Mr. Ishida?" His head jerked up slightly, eyes hazy. "Ryu?" I rushed forward. "You're bleeding." "It's fine," he muttered, voice hoarse. "Just a scrape." But it wasn't fine. The cut looked fresh, probably from one of his late-night sparring sessions. He'd once mentioned he boxed to relieve stress. There was a small first aid kit on the shelf, untouched. I grabbed it without thinking. "Let me help," I said, kneeling beside him. He blinked down at me, as if confused by my presence. "You don't have to." "I know," I replied softly, "but I want to—" Something shifted in his expression, hesitation, maybe even disbelief. I cleaned the wound carefully, feeling the warmth of his skin under my fingertips. He winced but didn't pull away. The silence between us was different now, thick but not heavy, charged but not dangerous. "You shouldn't be here this late," he murmured. "Neither should you," I said before I could stop myself. A faint, almost invisible smile tugged at his lips. "Touché." His voice was softer now, stripped of its usual armor. He leaned back slightly, eyes fluttering as fatigue took over. And then, in a tone I'd never heard from him before, gentle, almost pleading, he whispered, "Ree?" My name from his lips sounded different. Human. Fragile. For a moment, I forgot he was my boss. He wasn't a man who barked orders or glared through glass walls. He was kinda a man trying too hard not to fall apart. He drifted off briefly, mumbling something I couldn't fully catch, something about not wanting to lose control again. I stayed by his side until his breathing steadied. When I finally left that night, my thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Kaido Ishida, the man I feared most, had bled, trembled, and said my name like it meant something. The next morning, I came to work earlier than usual. Kaido was already there, of course. He looked perfectly put together again, no trace of the previous night. When our eyes met, a flicker of recognition passed between us, but he looked away immediately. "Prepare the client file," he said curtly. "Yes, sir." The rest of the day passed in a blur. But beneath the surface of routine, tension brewed. I could feel him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. His tone was sharp, his commands brisk, as if he was trying to rebuild the walls I'd seen crumble. By afternoon, those walls finally cracked again. It started over something small. I'd reorganized his presentation notes without asking, thinking I was helping. But when he noticed, his voice thundered through the office. "Who told you to change my system?" He snapped, slamming the papers on the table. I stood there, heart pounding, but this time I didn't cower. "It made the layout clearer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't ask for your opinion," he growled, stepping closer. Usually, that tone would have made me shrink. But after last night, after seeing the man behind the mask, I couldn't. I met his gaze directly. "Then maybe you should. You hired me to assist, not to be silent." The air between us froze. His eyes widened slightly, not in anger, but in shock. No one ever talked back to him. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the ticking clock filled the space. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I refused to look away. Finally, Kaido exhaled, stepping back. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "You're brave when you're angry, Ryu." "I'm not angry," I said softly. "I'm just tired of being afraid." Something flickered in his eyes, guilt perhaps. He looked down, his hands tightening at his sides. "You shouldn't be afraid of me. And stop giving me reasons to be." The words left my mouth before I could take them back. His head snapped up, but instead of rage, I saw a kind of pain there. He looked like someone who'd just been told a truth he didn't want to hear. Without another word, he turned away, his voice low. "That'll be all, Ryu." The rest of the day passed in silence. When I left the building, I half expected a termination notice in my inbox. But instead, that night, as I sat staring at my phone, a message appeared. "Unknown number, don't be afraid of me. I'm trying." I stared at it for a long time, my heart thudding. No name, no signature, but I knew exactly who it was. And for the first time, instead of fear, I felt something else stir inside me. Something that scared me even more than his temper ever could. Curiosity. Because beneath all his anger and pride, Kaito Ishida wasn't just a cold, heartless boss. He was a man desperately trying to unlearn his own darkness. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to run from him or reach out and stay. Some truths hide in plain sight, waiting for the wrong moment to be found. For weeks, I tried to pretend things were normal after that late-night message from Kaito. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just his way of easing guilt. But deep down, something had shifted. His voice was still sharp, his expectations still high, but there was something different in his eyes now. When he spoke to me, there was hesitation, as if he was learning how to control not his anger, but his fear. And yet, the office walls still whispered about him. People admired his intelligence, envied his success, but no one trusted him. They said Kaito Ishida built his empire by crushing anyone who stood in his way. Some even joked that he had ice instead of blood. But I'd seen him bleed. One evening, I stayed behind to organize documents for an upcoming investor meeting. Kaito had already left, or so I thought. His office door was closed, lights off. But as I was filing away a set of reports, one folder slipped from my hands, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered papers was something that didn't belong, a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked inside one of the folders. Curiosity got the better of me. It was dated almost 10 years ago. The headline read, "Business Empire Crumbles. Ishida Group Faces Corruption Scandal." My heart skipped a beat. The photo below showed a man who looked startlingly like Kaito, older, heavier, but with the same sharp eyes. The article detailed how the former president, Takumi Ishida, was accused of embezzlement and bribery, leaving his son to face the fallout. My mind spun. Kaito's father. There were more clippings beneath it, articles about Kaito's early years in the company. Young executive rebuilds fallen empire. From scandal to success, Ishida Jr. leads with ruthless precision. Suddenly so much made sense. His obsession with control, his hatred of weakness, his constant fight to prove himself. But before I could put the papers away, the door behind me opened. "What are you doing?" His voice, quiet, dangerous, cut through the silence like glass. I froze, the newspaper still in my hand. "Kakato, Mr. Ishida," I stammered, standing quickly. I didn't mean to. He strode forward, his expression unreadable. "Where did you find that?" "It fell out of the reports," I said truthfully, holding it out. "I swear I wasn't." "Put it down," he ordered, his tone sharper than a blade. I obeyed, but my hands were trembling. The paper fluttered to the desk. For a long moment, he didn't move. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the article. He didn't move. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the article. Then, in a low voice that almost sounded like a growl, he said, "You think you know me now?" "No," I said quietly, "but I think I finally understand you." His eyes snapped to mine. "Don't pretend you understand anything about me." Something inside him broke then. His voice rose, not in rage, but desperation. "You think being ruthless was a choice? You think I wanted to become this?" He slammed his hand on the desk, startling me. "You have no idea what it's like to clean up your father's sins, to rebuild from nothing while people laugh behind your back." His words echoed in the room, heavy with old pain. I could see it now, the storm he'd been hiding for years. I wanted to speak, but he wasn't finished. His voice cracked as he continued, "They call me a fraud, a shadow of a criminal. Every contract I signed, every deal I made, people waited for me to fail so they could watch me burn like he did." He turned away, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles went white. So I stopped trusting. I stopped caring. I thought if I became harder, colder, if I never let anyone close, then no one could destroy me. Again, the silence after his confession felt endless. I swallowed, unsure what to say. Then softly I asked, "And has it worked?" He flinched. The question seemed to pierce straight through his defenses. Slowly he looked over his shoulder. His voice was barely above a whisper. "No, it's lonely." Something in me broke too. I'd never seen Kaito like this. Vulnerable, trembling, almost human. I took a small step forward. "You've carried that pain alone for too long." He scoffed bitterly. "Pity doesn't suit you, Ryu." It's not pity, I said firmly. It's empathy. There's a difference. He looked at me as if trying to decide whether to believe me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice that sounded more exhausted than angry, he murmured, I don't know how to be anything else. Kindness feels like weakness. I can't afford weakness. I met his gaze steadily. Maybe not in business. But you can't build a life on fear, Kaido. He inhaled sharply as though my words had struck too close to home. Then, without another word, he turned away. The conversation was over, or so I thought. But the next day, something changed. His tone was softer when he spoke to me. He started saying please and thank you, words I didn't think existed in his vocabulary. When I made a suggestion in a meeting, he actually paused to consider it. The staff noticed too. Whispers began spreading. People wondering what had happened to the cold, untouchable Mr. Ishida. Of course, not everyone was pleased. One of the senior executives, Mr. Sato, had always despised Kaido's authority. He started murmuring in the corners of the office, hinting that Kaido's reputation wasn't as clean as it seemed. Soon enough, rumors about the Ishida family scandal resurfaced, spreading through the company like wildfire. When I overheard two employees mocking Kaido behind his back, something inside me snapped. Do you even know what he went through? I said louder than I intended. The room went silent. He rebuilt this company when everyone turned their backs on him. You wouldn't last a week in his shoes. They stared at me, speechless. I walked away before I could regret it. At me, speechless. I walked away before I could regret it. Later that day, Kaido called me into his office. I expected anger, maybe disappointment for speaking out. Instead, he just stared at me for a long time, then said quietly, you shouldn't have to defend me. I wanted to, I replied. He looked almost bewildered. Then to my shock, he smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. You're reckless, he said softly. But thank you. For the first time, I saw warmth in his eyes instead of cold fire. It was fleeting, but it was there. That night, long after everyone left, I passed by his office again. The light was still on. I peeked through the glass and saw him sitting at his desk, head bowed, his hand by his office again. The light was still on. I peeked through the glass and saw him sitting at his desk, head bowed, his hand covering his face. His shoulders trembled slightly. He whispered to himself, unaware I could hear. I don't know how to be gentle, he said, but I want to learn with you. I froze. The honesty in his voice pierced through every wall between us. Before I could decide whether to step in, he wiped his face, straightened up, and turned off the light. As he walked out, I ducked behind the wall, my heart racing. I watched him pass, unaware of my presence. For the first time, I didn't see my boss. I saw a man trying, truly trying, to be better. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't run away from Kaido Ishida. Not anymore. Because behind his mask of perfection and control, I'd finally seen the truth. He wasn't a monster. He was a survivor learning how to live again. The storm finally hit. By the time I arrived at the office that morning, the tension was already thick enough to choke on. Whispers filled every corridor. Emails flew faster than usual, and the atmosphere felt like the air before lightning strikes. People stared at me, then quickly looked away, as if even eye contact could get them in trouble. When I reached my desk, I saw it. The headline on every business news site. Ishida Group's golden executive linked to family corruption scandal. There was Kaido's face, cold and unreadable even in print, next to words that painted him as the villain of his own company. My hands trembled. I knew what this meant. The past he'd fought so hard to bury had come back, clawing through the surface. Someone inside the firm had leaked it, and whoever it was had aimed to destroy him completely. Kaido didn't show up for the morning meeting. That was enough to start a wildfire of speculation. I couldn't take it anymore. I went straight to his office. The door was unlocked, unusual for him. Inside, the blinds were half drawn, letting slanted morning light cut through the quiet gloom. Kaido sat behind his desk, not in his usual upright, commanding posture, but slumped like a man whose strength had been stolen. His jacket was off, his tie loosened, and his usually neat hair fell messily across his eyes. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then softly, sir, are you okay? He looked up slowly, his gaze empty but still sharp. They finally got what they wanted, he said, his voice low and rough. Everything I built, it's all collapsing because of one name. My father's. I hesitated. The board? They called an emergency session. He interrupted. They want my resignation. He tried to sound calm, but I heard the quiver beneath the words. Kaido Ishida, the man who commanded rooms with a glance, looked utterly human, fragile even. I can explain, I said. They'll listen if you. They won't, he snapped, then immediately closed his eyes as if regretting it. They never do. To them, I'm the son of a liar, a thief. No amount of success will erase that. A liar, a thief. No amount of success will erase that. His bitterness cut deep, but I couldn't just stand there. Then let me speak, I said firmly. Let me stand up for you. His eyes flickered open again, searching my face for mockery, for pity, but found none. Ryu, he said quietly, you don't owe me that. I've treated you terribly. You should walk away now before this ruins you too. But I shook my head. No, you taught me how to be brave, even when it hurt. Now it's my turn. The board meeting was brutal. Every seat was filled with sharp suits, sharper tongues, and colder eyes. They didn't even let Kaido sit at the head of the table. Tongues and colder eyes. They didn't even let Kaido sit at the head of the table. The moment he entered, whispers began, and accusations followed. Kaido Ishida, one director said, the media has linked your father's crimes directly to offshore accounts your division once handled. How do you expect us to trust your leadership now? Kaido's expression was still and unreadable, but I saw the faint twitch of his jaw. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, I stood up. The room fell silent. I'll answer that, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Because I work under him every day, I've seen what kind of leader he really is. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I felt my heart hammering, but I didn't stop. Kaido Ishida built this department from nothing, I said. He made mistakes, sure, but he also protected us. He took responsibility when others ran. He pushed us because he believed in the best version of us, even when he didn't believe in himself. Kaido looked at me like he couldn't quite believe what I was doing. He's not his father, I continued. He's a man who spent his whole life trying to prove that. If you can't see that, then maybe this company doesn't deserve him. For a heartbeat, the silence was deafening. Then murmurs began, some angry, some surprised. Was deafening. Then murmurs began, some angry, some surprised. But the chairman, an old man with wise eyes, finally raised his hand. That's enough, he said. We'll deliberate privately. They left the room, one by one. I stayed standing. Kaido didn't move, just stared at me as though trying to understand something he'd never seen before. Finally, he whispered, "Why would you do that?" "Because someone had to," I said simply, "and because you're worth saving." The board decided to suspend him temporarily, pending investigation, but not fire him. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't defeat either. When the office emptied that evening, Kaido called me to the rooftop. The city lights stretched endlessly, glowing against the night sky. The wind was cool, carrying the distant hum of traffic. He stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, back straight but voice soft. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like that," he said. "People will talk." "Let them," I replied. "I've stopped caring what they say." He turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd met him, his eyes were not cold. They were weary, raw, searching. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. For how I treated you. For the fear I caused. I thought control was the only way to survive. But all it did was destroy every bridge I ever tried to build." His apology was halting but real. Each word felt like something he'd never said before. "I can't promise I'll stop being difficult," he added with a faint, self-explanatory, deprecating smile. "But I want to learn, if you'll still let me." I took a step closer. "Then start by not giving orders," I said softly. "Start by asking." His lips curved slightly. "Ugh. May I stay by your side a little longer?" That made me laugh quietly. "You may." For a while we just stood there, the city below us shimmering like 1,000 distant stars. There was no need for more words. The tension that had once defined us had shifted, becoming something steadier, something honest. Over the next weeks, things slowly changed. Kaido didn't bark commands anymore. He asked questions. He listened. When he made mistakes, he admitted them. The office, once ruled by fear, began to feel warmer. And as for me, I found my voice. One evening, after a long day, I caught him smiling to himself while reviewing files. It wasn't the cold, guarded expression I'd first known. It was soft, almost shy. He noticed me watching and chuckled quietly. "You're staring again, Ryu." I blinked. "Sorry, You smiled. He tilted his head. I guess I finally had a reason to. For a moment, he looked at me, not as his assistant, not as someone beneath him, but as an equal. And in that gaze, there was gratitude, warmth, and something deeper, something that didn't need to be said aloud. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely above the wind, "for not being afraid of me." And for the first time, I didn't feel like the timid assistant who had once trembled under his command. I felt like someone who had helped tame a storm and found a home in the calm that followed.